And are headed out toward the over the pass into the Salmon National Forest, and there's some of the peaks. This was on the way south, I think, to Arizona, where, as I mentioned before, we have a whole bunch of film that's just set up aside at the end of this for the 2 trips we had to Arizona. Like I say, it may not make sense now, but it, somehow or another it did then. This is Craters of the Moon. We got there just as one of those real quick and bitter little thunderstorms hit, adding to the eerie landscape that we found here. This is a real oddity and quite an interesting place to visit. The ash and lava and fresh, sharp, craggy flows of hot material look like they happened maybe just a couple of months ago. And as I understand from the geology that you see there, and the signs and so forth, that this all occurred several million years ago. Even today, as you can see, there's very, very little plant life has been able to catch hold in these barren cinders. And like as things are, I don't know how that little spot got in there, but kids are having a good time running around on the ash. Of course, Baby would always rather run than walk. You can also see these volcanic cones away off in the distance far to the south of Craters of the Moon Park. I think some of these pictures that are blurred out were probably attempts to show the effects of that quick little violent rain and windstorm, although it may not have done so. The car would rock and wobble even when sitting still, so it was a pretty heavy hitter. There it is. And we're making our way down now to Salt Lake City with the church and tabernacle and statuary and religious symbols of part of our early heritage. We, of course, come across the statue of Brigham Young and some of the other revered pioneers that came across with him, of which, of course, my great-grandpa George was one. And it's really architecturally a very pretty place, and the parks and gardens around the buildings are nice. There's Moroni, I guess. It's very hard for me to interpret, not being a Mormon or even a Jack Mormon. Of course, there's their tribute to the seagulls. Now, they say that there are only 2 things that a real Mormon greatly dislikes. One is a Jack Mormon, and the other is a seagull that won't eat crickets. There's one of the early pioneers with the push cart. A good little young tourist. On down to Bryce Canyon. All the sculpturing of these clay cliffs and sandstone has left the colors in vivid lines, yellows to pinks to dark reds. And the tiny pinnacles and so forth that were created are really something to see. I think the nicest thing about Bryce Canyon is that you're right up and in it, and it can really be a part of the setting. It's all around you, not so much as other parks where you're kind of at a distance. An odd bit of flora I found there was a plant. Looks just exactly like a bitterroot, only with yellow flowers. And I found out later that that's one of the common forms of the bitterroot. Of course, up in Montana, we're familiar with only the pink variety. Couple of camp robbers there, and one of our little friends, the chipmunk, and real close at hand too. Hi, baby. Pretty good shot of a blue jay there. They seem to be a little bluer than the kind we have up here. Oh, there's an incident Ty'll never forget. He fell down and really skinned his knee bad. I bet he's still got the scar and will probably always remember it happened there in Bryce Canyon Park. Now we skip on over to the big Dolomites in Zion Canyon. Probably not nearly as impressive in the fine points as Bryce Canyon is, but nonetheless pretty massive in its own way and unique. Both these occasions, I guess you can understand by the look of things that we were passing through these parks pretty much by ourselves, in that we had just gotten down there prior to the vacation season, after most of these had just opened. Oh, we were kind of lucky, and we also had some pretty good weather to take some pictures. Of course, there are a couple of things one shouldn't do, and that's take pictures out of the window of a car, etc. But you gotta try things, I guess. Here's some pictures of wild turkey. I don't know whether you can see them too clearly. First wild turkey I've ever seen in the wilderness. That happens to be an old hen and a bunch of chicks. We saw her as we were coming out through the Kaibab National Forest. Here's some of the eroded and water-driven cliffs and arches. There we are back into a winter scene. Some mountain pass somewhere. Probably between here in Montana and way down there in Arizona country. It was kind of nice to be able to live in Phoenix and enjoy all the year-round summer weather, and when Christmas came, jump in the car and drive north up the Black Canyon Highway to Flagstaff and throw snowballs at each other and get wet and cold hands and runny noses and jump in the car and go back to Phoenix. Here's the first glimpse of the upper Painted Desert, getting down out of the high country. And you follow these desert swales down to Grand Canyon and then across Navajo country and on down to Phoenix. Balanced rocks and abandoned ruins and movie locations, old ranches and whatever on the north edge of the Painted Desert. Here we are down at Navajo Bridge, and again you'll see us go back in time out of sequence with one of our best little travelers when he was quite a little tyke. Yep, that's Mitch. This first pass at Arizona is when we all moved from Montana when I was on leave, or really from Fort Lewis, Korea, and then back home and on down to Fort Huachuca. Yeah, well, there we are growing up in Arizona in the desert. So here we'll see the first time we lived down there as a family, Fort Huachuca, and our trips with the folks when they came to visit back to old Tucson and the Desert Museum in Mexico. And then you'll see the remainder of these visits after we moved down there many years later with IBM when I was assigned in Phoenix. So you see the logic there. We kept all the desert and southwest things together, kinda. And here we are out at San Carlos Mission by Tucson, I think. Here we are at San Carlos Mission, just out of Tucson, on one of the visits when the folks came down with Grandma, and it was hot. Believe me, it was hot. But the desert was in full bloom, and when you looked around, you could see the little fellers and critters. That's the interesting thing about the desert. You have to kind of look close to see all the interesting things that are there. When the desert's in bloom in the early spring, it's really magnificent. Everything comes to life, but it only lasts for a little while.
And with the dawn listen to him, Dan, he's the devil, not a man, and he spreads the burning sand with water. Dan, can you see that big green tree where the water's running free and it's waiting there for you and me? Water.
There's our first place we landed at Sierra Vista in a motel where we had to spend several months waiting for quarters on post. The desert didn't stop anywhere near. It came right up to the doorstep, obviously. Here are some pictures of beautiful yucca cactus in bloom.
There's water. Dan, don't you listen to me, Dan, he's the devil, not a man, and he spreads the burning sand with water. Dan, can you see that big green tree where the water's running free and it's waiting there for you and me? Water. Cool, clear water. Cool, clear water.
There's a saguaro fruit, and one of the interesting things about it is it looks like a miniature watermelon, kind of sweet, and for ages Indians have used that sugar and sap in there to make candy. Pretty good too. Here's a trip to the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, a little prairie dog there. This is one of the most interesting zoological gardens I've ever seen. All the exhibits are in pretty natural surroundings, but they've gathered everything that's on the Sonora Desert, plant and animal both, insects, snakes, lizards, whatever. And they're all close at hand for viewing and well cared for. You can see that guy is pretty contented. He's eating up his pan. Those Sonora whitetail are pretty small. There's a pronghorn. He's kind of familiar to us up here. Land tortoise. Here's our friend, a road runner. I wonder where the coyote is. I've seen them really make the dust fly going after those real quick and lively little lizards. Whoop. There's a mallard duck getting himself all squared away for dinner. There's a chaparral, kind of a bigger bird bird than the roadrunner, almost the size of a buzzard, but they both do the same things. Yeah, we had quite a visit to Old Tucson this day. Grandma and Audrey and the folks. And we couldn't get over how uncomfortable Grandma was with the terrible heat that she felt that day. She was sweating, and long, exhausting day, and we just couldn't get enough water. And we all had quite a laugh out of it when we got back to Sierra Vista, because in the morning when we were all getting up and ready to make a day of it, she'd gotten dressed and inadvertently forgot and left her nightgown on from the night before, so she was doubly dressed for this occasion. We sure enjoyed ourselves out there. Along here, the movie location of Old Tucson, almost any glimpse you can take a look and say, well, now, you know, that's kind of familiar to me here and there, because I know I've seen that in a Western movie. And the truth is that you have. Tons and tons of movies where we've seen these sets. There's Grandma, nightgown and all. And here we are at Old Tombstone. This is one of the most interesting places. It's kind of like Dixon, Montana, a town too tough to die. And even though the folks didn't make it for their annual event, there's one event there that they hold each year called El Dorado Week that I was able to visit and include some films on. Well, we enjoyed our visit there, and maybe I can point out some of the action later too as we get into El Dorado Week. Old Tombstone.
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso, I fell in love with a Mexican girl.
Here's the OK Corral.
Nighttime would find me in Rose's Cantina. Music would play and 30 new world.
It's the jail where Wyatt Earp and folk held forth. This guy's name is Hobart Earp, direct descendant of Wyatt Earp. And in El Dorado Week, he played a feature part of his namesake in the street gunshot or gunfight scenes and so forth, you see.
Wild as the West Texas wind. Dashing and daring, a drink he was sharing with wicked Felina, the girl that I love. So in anger I challenged his right for the love of this maiden. Down put his hand for the gun that he wore. My challenge was answered in less than a heartbeat. The handsome young stranger lay dead on the floor. Out through the back door of Roses I ran, out where the horses were tied. I caught a good one, it looked like it could run up on its back and away I ride, just as fast as I could from the West Texas town of El Paso out to the badlands of New Mexico. Back in El Paso, my life would be worthless. Everything's gone in life, nothing is left. It's been so long since I've seen the young maiden. My love is stronger than my fear of death. I saddled up and away I did go, riding alone in the dark. Maybe tomorrow a bullet may find me. Tonight nothing's worse than this pain in my heart. And at last here I am on the hill overlooking El Paso. I can see Rosa's cantina below. My love is strong and it pushes me onward. Down off the hill to Felina I go. Off to my right I see 5 mounted cowboys. Off to my left, right, a dozen or more. Shouting and shooting, I can't let them catch me. I have to make it to Rosa's back door. Something is dreadfully wrong, for I feel a deep burning pain in my side.
Here come the Earp brothers in the shootout with the Clantons and McClowers. And that's where she all winds up.
Where I fall, though I am weary, I can't stop to rest. I see the white puff of smoke from the rifle. I feel the bullet go deep in my chest. From out of nowhere, Felina has found me, kissing my cheek as she kneels by my side. Say goodbye to loving arms that I'll die for. One little kiss and Felina, goodbye.
Yeah, there's the way she wound up. Boot Hill. Here lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44. No less, no more. And here we go to Mexico. We crossed the border here at Nogales, Mexico, and went down there on this particular occasion to witness their Cinco de Mayo, or 5th of May celebration, which is a national holiday similar to our 4th of July or Independence Day. Here we are out at another little border town, I think was Agua Prieta or San Pedro. At any rate, it had quite a different flavor. Of course, we weren't here for a celebration, but it was one of those kind of places that's a little bit remote and mysterious and eerie. As you can see, there's nobody on the street, and when they saw gringos around with a camera, they weren't out to welcome us as tourists. So they all hid inside their homes, and it seemed like the place was deserted, but you knew it wasn't. think Dad and Mom and everybody agrees that it was here for a look of some interest, but kind of briefly. And we were all a little bit anxious to get back out of town. Well, so we did get out of there, and here we are down in Nogales. Some of the street vendor shops, all really enjoying that. Here's my favorite little turista, and he's along here in the vendor alleys with a guy who became quickly known as Pancho to the residents. Not to know why, however. There he is. There's Grandma and Mom and Nancy and our own family Shoposaurus, Audrey. Here we are at the Corrida, the bull ring. And after several occasions down there, I was able to get some pretty good bullfight films, if that's what one likes. Well, I don't think I was the typical bullfight spectator, because I was always hoping that the bull would really give it to one of these guys. You know, the bull doesn't have a chance in these bullfights. He's first attacked by picadoros, which are mounted officials who have large blunt-ended spears. They hook the shoulders and neck, or pierce the shoulders and neck of the bull to get his blood drained a bit and to create wounds to keep him from hooking. Then there are the picadoros, or the banderilleros, which place banderillas, those stick-like device with like fish spear hooks that stick into the shoulders of the bull. Now there's a fresh bull, and maybe if they would let him continue the fight that way, you'd have a decent chance. But you'll see now, as these are the banderilleros, keeping the bull in the center of the ring and let him show off a bit to see what a powerful animal he is. And soon these people, there's a mounted banderillero. He'll drive this barbed hooks into the bull's shoulder and break it off from the stick. You can see now it has colored wrappings. That guy there with a tricorn hat is one of the few American bullfighters to fight from a horse, and he was a pretty spectacular guy and rather prominent. Time he's placing his own banderillas. See the blood coming down from the shoulders of the bull. That's after he's been piked pretty good by the picadoros. But once they get half a dozen or so banderillas placed, then they become serious and allow the fighter to go out and continue the fight until the bull dies. Yeah, that's the American there. Bull is still plenty game, but obviously the pain and wounds in his shoulders are going to prevent him from doing some of these things. It's really classical training of horses. I guess bullfighters too, but these horses do a spectacular job. bravado of the bullfighter is to, when the bull finally becomes so weakened and confused that he pulls forth his sword. That's the muleta, the killing cape that he has there now, the small one. And in the hand, his right hand, under the cuff, is a sword. And the big bravado is to go over the bull's horns, plunging the sword between his shoulder blades, hopefully down into his chest, heart. There's the sword. An instant kill didn't happen, but the bull staggered around and was finally given the coup de grace. There he goes off to the hotel downtown Nogales, where we used to go for beefsteaks after the bullfight. I've only went to my first bullfight to see it. I would have never gone back probably had it not been for the idea of treating others to this spectacle. I think in a long day of bullfighting, they probably put away 5 or 6 bulls. Well, here we are back in the USA and headed out to Apache Lake. Apache Lake was set up by the Air Force, Williams Air Force Base, as a service people's rec area. This was taken so long ago that there was no development there at all when we were there, excepting the rec area where you could rent boats and a cottage. I really enjoyed getting up there. This occasion was Sam Rosser, who was my chief fire direction computer, and his wife, Jo. There's Sam. Always had a great time together, and they loved the kid. Between Jo and Sam and Roger and Peg Underwood at Fort Huachuca, Mitch had more relatives than you can shake a stick at. They all kind of adopted him as their nephew. There's Jo and Nancy after going down to the lake for a swim. You see that guy out there doing fancy stuff on those water skis? Well, guess who that is? Gold days. Here's part of Fort Huachuca's main gate. Electronic warfare fire support battery. Only combat troopers on post. And there's our home, our quarters on base. Watch this for memory. 164 Jeffords. Here, Nancy. Yeah, little puppy Mikey. He got me 3 DRs on post for barking, creating mischief, and trying to bite the mailman. So he had to go out and spend the rest of his tour with the cowboys. There's Mitch and Nancy over at Roger and Peggy's house. Living in a desert and remote location like we were, it was an obligation that if you wanted to be entertained, you had to create it yourself, because we were miles and miles away from anything else. Here's Sam and Joe and Roger, and since the camera was taking its own pictures and needed a little help, we just clipped off Mitchie and Nancy. Roger and Peg were a couple of the best social hosts you ever saw. He was my boss as the chief of operations, and I was chief of fire direction. Roger excelled at barbecuing New York steaks and fixing Cuba Libras. And of course, Sam and Joe and Nancy and I were some of the most appreciative guests you could ever have. God, those were good dinners. Roger and Peg have both passed on now, but they're missed. A friend of mine, John Guidos, he was our without equal observer, and he continued with his career in the Army, having started out at age 15 in the Navy as an enlisted man in World War II. Got through that and joined the Army and made it through the Korean War, and by the time he retired as a sergeant major, had made 3 tours in the Vietnam War. He lives out in the Portland area now, and just a year ago I was able, when Peggy and I were traveling that way, to stop and spend an afternoon with John and have a nice dinner and reminisce. The only time I've seen John since these pictures were taken. He was the best chief of detail I ever worked with. Of course, he said I was the best artillery shooter he ever worked with, too. So you can see how old GIs still pat each other on the back. Here's Nancy having a good time turning ruins into ruin. These old deserted ranches and outposts, and there's an old filling station. There they just sit out there weathering in the sun, and even an abandoned railroad station. These were part of the exterior around the perimeters of Fort Huachuca. Makes you wonder what kind of stories these old places could tell. Oops, now, slow down. Old abandoned one-room schoolhouse. Hand pump out front. Yeah, these old places, we really must see the end of those, I guess. I wonder what kind of stories they could tell. Here's a shot of Las Vegas at night. Really an electric city. Not much has changed there either, I don't think, except more light bulbs. Quite an impressive sight, though. And there we are, right back in Montana, I guess. Yep. There's little Mitch after we got out of the Army, and there's the Falcon. Back at home wondering what's going to happen next. Here's little Jill Roulier, the daughter of Sam and Imogene Roulier, friends of the folks. She's her effervescent, charming self. She's all grown up now, of course. Her bigger brother Tim is quite a star of the Western musical world. There's Sam, Andy Moore, and there's Nancy and Grandma and Melba and Mom and Mar and Aunt Clara, Grandma Lozo's sister, from out at Seattle, all enjoying a very modest, uneventful game of canasta. Here was a visit to Grandpa Jim Lozo's grave down at Plains on Memorial Day. I designed his gravestone, and they cut it out pretty much as I had it pictured, with Hubbard Dam and his rifle and fishing rod at rest. And here we are back at the Bison Range, one of numerous times back there. Here's Mitch and one of his acquaintances at the Bison Range. This was a little white-tailed doe named Sally, who always recognizable because she had a kind of a crooked face. Gentle as could be, inquisitive, and quite the pet. Take about anything you had and would stick her head into the car window to munch on some cigarettes out of your shirt pocket if you let her. It's awful shameful and kind of sorry to think that only a year or two after this, somebody came in there and shot her with a .22. Here's a big old bull elk named Tom. I presume that he passed on years since. But he was quite a proud old beast, and always a joy for us to stop by and visit, especially since we had him on a first name basis. When these pictures were taken, he had a bit of competition in the form of a young spike bull. I never did get to know him by his first name. And Tom also had a cow or two as companions there. They never seemed to be of as much a good nature as him. But I suppose since a big old bull elk is usually charged with maintaining a romance with some 24 cows, that when all that affection is transferred to just one or two animals, they probably get a little testy about it. There's a nice bunch of pronghorns. Now here we are back at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in southwest Arizona, watching the Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds, put on their drill. Of course, they also had a static display of gear which was current at that time, but now all museum pieces. There's a C-119 about to go up and deliver some of the Army's Golden Knights Precision Parachute Squad. Some of these are bound to be blotted out by sky. I don't know what we're looking at in the center there, but maybe a parachutist. There's a medium bomber that's an extinct relic now, and there's a 133 kind that's still in use. Here's one of the Golden Knights. He's jumping a Paracommander. There's another guy shooting on in on a Paravane. Hey, settle down. That guy's doing a pretty long delay with the smoke tied to his legs. There, he finally opened up. That's a Paravane. That's what we just saw there on the flight line was the Canadian Precision team, and they're the Air Force with their F-4 Phantom jets, which were top of the line in those days. Now those old F-4s just finished as wild weasels. The F-4C or G just finished its probably last campaign in the Middle East in the Persian Gulf War. There they are. Look like they're glued together. Here's Montezuma's Castle, National Monument. I know it's in Arizona, but I sure can't remember what was important about that place this many years later. There again, as I promised, you see the little kids growing up one more time. Here we are back at the Desert Museum, as you can see, a number of years later. That gal that just walked by was Hank's niece, Valerie, who would come down to visit us. You know, a visit that seemed to stay on a long, long time. There's that bear again. Gave him a new pan to chew on even. Little band of Coatimundis. Beautiful shot of a wood duck, all dressed out in his very best. There's a national symbol, proud as can be.